Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the 29th Annual Business Forecast Luncheon. As you all come in here and take your seats, please direct your attention to the screens as we play a little video to thank the sponsors who made this event possible. Thank you. Please come in and take your seats.
The Walton presenting partner, Walmart and Sam's Club. The Walton academic partners are Greenwood Gearhart, Devereaux, Drake Farms, Rose Law Firm, RMP Attorneys at Law, and Simmons. The Walton corporate partners are Arkansas Blue Cross Blue Shield, Connor Winters, Attorney at Law, Cox, Cushman & Wakefield, Sage Partners, Kutak Rock, Weisenbest Realty, Regions, and Wright Lindsay Jennings. The Walton business partners are American Electric Power Foundation, Centennial Bank, Colliers International, Energy, Focus Real Estate, Hogan Taylor, J.B. Hunt, Landmark Certified Public Accountants, Mitchell Williams Law Firm, Nabholz, Quattlebaum Grooms and Toll. The Walton media partners are Arkansas Money and Politics, Celebrate Arkansas, Talk Business and Politics, and the Sam and Walton College of Business Center for Business and Economic Research. The Walton presenting partner, Walmart and Sam's Club. The Walton academic partners are Greenwood Gearhart, Devereaux, Drake Farms, Rose Law Firm, RMP Attorneys at Law, and Simmons. The Walton corporate partners are Arkansas Blue Cross Blue Shield, Connor Winters, Attorney at Law, Cox, Cushman & Wakefield, Sage Partners, Kutak Rock, Weisenbest Realty, Regions, and Wright Lindsay Jennings. The Walton business partners are American Electric Power Foundation, Centennial Bank, Colliers International, Energy, Focus Real Estate, Hogan Taylor, J.B. Hunt, Landmark Certified Public Accountants, Mitchell Williams Law Firm, Nabholz, Quattlebaum Grooms and Toll. The Walton media partners are Arkansas Money and Politics, Celebrate Arkansas, Talk Business and Politics, and the Sam and Walton College of Business Center for Business and Economic Research.
Thank you very much to our sponsors. If I could please get a round of applause to thank our wonderful sponsors who supported us all these years, without whose support we could not make this event possible. As you come in and sit down, I know we've had some wonderful weather here recently. There's snow on the ground still. Some of you have been out of power for a few days, so we've prepared for you a nice hot meal. And the showers are in the building next door if you need those too. So please come in, take your seat, and begin eating. We're about to kickstart our program here. So a couple of housekeeping notes. Please feel free to use social media. Our hashtag is BFL2023. If you use social media, you're welcome to use all of it except for TikTok. So other than that, feel free to use any and all social media. With that said, I want to welcome to the stage the Chancellor of the University of Arkansas, Dr. Charles Robinson. Please help me welcome Dr. Charles Robinson. Best I can do before.
I understand. Good morning, and thank you, everyone. Thank you, Mervin. And thanks to each of today's forecasters. And I mean that from the bottom of my heart. Thank you, because I know that economic forecasting can be a thankless job. If you get it right, people may not even notice. After all, you're just doing your job. But if you get it wrong, if you forget to carry the 4 when you're crunching numbers, or you let one measly recession sneak up without warning, you'll never hear the end of it. And so you don't get the thanks that you deserve, and I appreciate your work. Thank you so much. I'm a historian, and I think that the past helps put today's event into proper perspective. We're very fortunate. People have always wanted to know what the future holds, but civilizations didn't have the luxury of something like we have today. Take the ancient Greeks. They built one of the most advanced civilizations in the world, but when they wanted to predict the future, the best they could come up with was slaughtering sheep and searching for the meaning in the entrails. And it took an expert to know whether the line in the liver was good news or bad news. And then moving through history, there are countless examples of how forecasters lack the database insights that today's forecasters had. We see people who look for patterns in the sand, dust, clouds, or smoke, or the behavior of birds, or random book passages, or the shoulder bones of cattle, or palm reading, and the list goes on. And even in the 1920s, one of the most influential economic prognosticators, Evangeline Adams, her high-profile candidates or clients included celebrities like Charles Schwab and J.P. Morgan and 2 presidents of the New York Stock Exchange. And she had a wildly popular radio show. And how did she gain her following? By making financial predictions based on the movement of the sun, moon, stars, and the planets. That's right, she was an astrologer. It's no wonder that we were in the Great Depression by the end of the decade. And as I wrap it up, I want to say that I'm glad to see so many people here today. Our university's land grant mission involves service to the state and its people and the businesses here. Today's luncheon is a great example of how the land grant mission is in action. And I know that we will learn a lot today, and I am excited about being part of it. And speaking of Arkansas's economy and the service to Arkansans, I would be remiss if I failed to recognize our new Secretary of Commerce, Hugh McDonald, who is here today. Hugh, will you stand where people can recognize you? I saw Hugh. There you go. Great seeing you, Hugh. Great visit yesterday. We look forward to your leadership. And I know that we have other elected officials in the audience, and I don't want to call out names because I'm sure I'll miss someone. Will all of our elected officials please stand so we can recognize you? Thank you so much for your service to our city and our state and our county. Thank you so much. Now, our next speaker needs no introduction. I know that's cliche, but I'm telling you, he is a person who truly fits this cliche. Please join me in giving a rousing welcome to the one and only Matt Waller, Dean of the Sam Walton College of Business.
Thank you, Chancellor Robinson. Welcome to the 2023 Business Forecast Luncheon. We're in the middle of another fantastic year in the Walton College, so I thought I'd give you just a few highlights. Senior Associate Dean Brent Williams, who's over here, has led our effort to develop a new strategy within the college that you're going to see unfold over the next few years. It's really terrific. Our reputation as a college is helping us retain and attract top faculty who continue to excel in teaching and research. Our reputation and connections with the business community also allows us to work with industry experts like John List, who is speaking today. And John List wrote a book I would encourage you to read if you're interested in business. Is that me, or do you hear that? The book he wrote, John List, he'll be introduced later. I'm not going to introduce him, but he wrote a book called The Voltage Effect, The Science of Scaling. He's definitely one of the top economists in the world. We're glad to have him here. One other note, how many of you, I know many of you are in finance and you've taken the portfolio management class at the university and the business school. Raise your hand if you took that class, the portfolio management class. I guess there's quite a few. We again took top honors at the 2022 CMT Association Investment Challenge. The return on that portfolio has just been amazing. And also I wanted to mention that we're looking forward to the induction of our 4 new members into the Arkansas Business Hall of Fame, February 17th in Little Rock. This year's class includes Kurt Bradbury, Fletcher Lord Jr., Judy McReynolds, and Ross Whipple. I hope you can join us there, February 17th. One other thing I wanted to mention is thanks to the generosity of J.B. Hunt Transport, Inc., they gave a naming endowment to the Department of Supply Chain Management recently, and now we're called the J.B. Hunt Transport Department of Supply Chain Management in the Walton College of Business. And you may or may not know this, but the undergraduate program in supply chain management is now ranked #1 in North America by Gartner. We're actually in the 3rd year of that ranking, and our graduate program in supply chain management is now ranked #2 in North America. We're trying to get to 1. Each year at the Business Forecast Luncheon, we invite you to forecast values for 15 economic indicators for the upcoming year. We then give awards to the top 3 overall forecasters. Before I turn to the overall economic forecasting awards, as we do each year, I want to take a moment to remember a special friend of the Arkansas Business Forecast Luncheon. Mary Ann Greenwood received her PhD in economics from the Walton College in 1982 and immediately founded Greenwood and Associates. Through her life, Mary Ann was a strong supporter of the Walton College and just to many Arkansans, and was among the people who helped push for the inception of the Business Forecast Luncheon that we have here 29 years ago. She was a steadfast supporter. Mary Ann passed away last year, and in honor of all of her contributions, we've named our Best Forecaster Award the Mary Ann Greenwood Award for Best Economic Forecaster. Can I please get a round of applause in memory of Mary Ann? She is definitely missed. I am going to announce who among you were the most accurate economic forecasters last year. Our 3rd place forecaster was Bryant Parmeter of Walmart. Bryant, would you come up here? We're going to get a picture. Our 2nd place forecaster is Eric Dabowski of Alpine Associates. Eric? And the top spot, the Mary Ann Greenwood Award for Best Economic Forecast, goes to Elin Lai from the Walton Family Foundation. Elen's husband's a professor of economics at the University of the Walton College. He might be a little jealous of you. Okay, let me once again remind you to fill out this year's contest form, which is available in the blue sheets at your table. We also have a QR code if you want to fill it out online. Make sure to forecast all 15 variables for the award. And finally, please make sure to fill out the contact information and event evaluation. It's now my pleasure to introduce today's moderator, Todd Simmons. Todd is Chief Executive Officer of Simmons Foods, Inc. and Associates, located in Siloam Springs, Arkansas. He joined Simmons in 1990. Todd is also Chairman of the Board of Nomeda Lab, Inc., a cancer diagnostic testing firm, and General Partner in Natural Capital, LLC, a Heartland-focused private equity fund. He currently serves on the boards of the National Chicken Council, Signature Bank of Arkansas, the Razorback Foundation, Theater Squared, Northwest Arkansas Council, and Endeavor Global of Northwest Arkansas. Let's welcome Todd Simmons.
All right, I'm really pleased to be here today, and thank you, Dean Waller. It's certainly an honor to be asked to moderate this luncheon. So I want to take us back in time to prior to 1995. I know for some of you that's really early and maybe before you were born. Our license plates in Arkansas had a slogan, the land of opportunity. And we switched to the natural state, which I think appropriately so. What a great place we have here with the natural beauty of our state, and it adds to the quality of life that we have. But I'd like for us to think today in the context of the discussions we're going to have from 95 to today and into the future. I think that slogan, the land of opportunity, is still very valid. The headlines are great. The underpinnings for all of us that are moving here to this area or live here, though, are going to be critical to focus on. So the headlines, 10,000 new jobs open here. Our major employers, like Walmart, building a massive home office campus. Tyson Foods moving employees from major metropolitan areas down into our region. J.B. Hunt continuing to shift their business model more and more towards the logistics and the technology behind it. All of the other great growth companies that are in our region, those are amazing headlines and certainly lean us towards a great future and great opportunity. But there are three things that I think for our region and likely the state that I think are critical for us to consider. And those three things are affordable housing and all up and down the economic strata, transportation infrastructure, and workforce development. The affordable housing piece, we have seen the headlines of we're the top of our metropolitan area as far as the growth and the cost or the price of houses in our market. There is no supply of affordable housing, and if we want to continue to grow our economy here in Northwest Arkansas and in the state, we want people who move here to put roots down. And the way you put roots down is having a place that you call home. And the best thing we can do for folks is to have that first rung of the economic ladder have a quality, affordable place that they can call home, and they can continue to build their careers here in Northwest Arkansas. Hand in glove is our transportation infrastructure. As we build out these employment centers that I mentioned earlier, and we continue to build manufacturing in our area as well, transportation to and from those areas of affordable housing to places of work has to be a focus for our region. I heard several people who had interesting times driving here today, and we don't have the issues of Austin We don't have the issues of Atlanta or Chicago, but we certainly have seen that our transportation infrastructure is behind, and it will be very challenging to catch up. And we have to focus our resources to prioritize, to advocate for our region, and get the tax dollars and execute on transportation infrastructure if we're going to be a place with quality of life and a cost of living that is competitive with markets that are growing like ours. And finally, workforce development is critical. I truly appreciate the university and their ability to produce students that not only have technical skills, but they come in with great communication and leadership skills and add value from day one in our organizations across Northwest Arkansas. So thank you very much, Dean Waller, for collaborating and being willing to push for great leadership skills for those students. But for those students coming out of high school who aren't bound for college, how do we incent them and show them a career path in the trades that have awesome career and earning potential? And that is a critical factor for our economy. It's hard to build houses if you don't have plumbers, electricians, welders, HVAC technicians. It's hard to run major operations for manufacturing if we don't have those same skills, skilled maintenance technicians and that sort of thing. So for us to have a great, vibrant economy and for the land of opportunity to really to resonate with all folks, those are three things that I think you might keep in mind as we lean into these discussions today. Now, I don't have a formal education in economics. I took 2 classes in college that were required, but I did go to the School of Hard Knocks in the chicken business, and for 30 years have been enjoying sometimes and enduring other times the laws of supply and demand. So I'm excited to be able to hear from experts in the area. As we know, economics is really not as esoteric as we might think. It impacts all of us, and all of us become experts at it whenever gas prices go to $4 or they drop, and we're really happy about that. And we pontificate on the reasons why. Well, these people actually know, which is wonderful. So as we dive in, the structure will be a discussion around global economy, then the US economy, then Arkansas's economy. And there are green note cards that I would appreciate y'all writing your questions. Comments probably won't get read, so write some questions that are intelligent and we will relay them to our great panel. With that, I would like to introduce our first panelist. Julia Coronado is founder of economic research firm MacroPolicy Perspectives and a clinical associate professor at the McCombs School of Business. Previously, she served as an economist at the Federal Reserve Board of Governors for 8 years, forecasting the US economy and publishing scholarly articles on pension finances and market valuations, retirement savings, digital currency, and monetary policy. She is the president of the National Association of Business Economists and serves on the board of directors of Robert Half International and Dynex Capital, the advisory boards of the Bureau of Economic Analysis, the Pension Research Council at the Walton School, and the Cleveland Fed's Center for Inflation Research. Please help me welcome Julia Coronado to the 2023 Business Forecast Luncheon.
Thank you for that introduction, and thank you for having me. I've been only here about 24 hours, and I've enjoyed every minute of it. So, very impressed with the dynamism of the region here. My job is to set the stage globally. So let me go ahead and do that. My theme for the global outlook is a test of resiliency. So you might be aware that as far as the forecasting community goes, there's sort of even odds of a recession this year or not a recession this year. In fact, the odds have actually improved slightly of late. I'm going to start by presenting, this slide shows you the IMF's forecast for this year, for 2023, but this was done back in October, and I think there's a few green shoots that have happened since then. You can see that the IMF was projecting GDP growth would slow. It slowed very substantially in 2022, and they were projecting that it would slow almost everywhere again in 2023. In fact, some of those growth rates, including 1% for the US, could be consistent with a recession depending on its composition. Certainly the baseline was a recession for the Euro area, and Latin America as well was expected to decelerate substantially. The pickup in developing Asia came mainly from the reopening in China. And if we go down the list of headwinds on the right-hand side, the headwinds are plentiful. Fiscal policy has been tightening as, you know, the US and many countries put in tremendous amounts of fiscal support during the pandemic. That is fading away. Monetary policy has been responding to the surge in inflation that I'll turn to and show you. It's been quite global in scope, and so all central banks have been raising rates extremely rapidly. And then China has been experiencing tremendous structural headwinds. Demographically, Chinese population and labor force growth is negative, actually. They have a real estate overhang, sort of credit overhang that they need to work through, and they've been implementing zero COVID policies, which really have gotten in the way of growth. They've turned that one around. They've relaxed the COVID restrictions. They're in the middle of a surge of COVID, but there is an expectation that they'll work through that and that their economy will get a boost from that reopening this year. In Europe, Europe is still at war. The Russian invasion of Ukraine is still quite a structural disruption. And there's a broader theme of the world sort of separating into blocks again. So we've been through 3 decades of globalization, with the fall of the wall and the end of the Soviet Union leading to, and the rise of China leading to ever greater globalization. We are moving to what the IMF refers to as an era of global fragmentation, where we increasingly have trading blocks, one that's centered around Russia and China, and one that's centered around Western economies and market economies more broadly. But one of my themes here is that people are actually pretty resilient. And I think I'm going to take Europe as the example right now. European data has actually been looking pretty good lately, a lot better than people expected. And in particular, one of the things that was expected to drag Europe into a recession was the energy supply. They were dependent on Russian energy. They were seeing a surge of prices that were going to be taxing European households and really leading to greater restraint on spending and an outright recession. But Europeans did something. They responded to that. They reopened some mothballed power plants. They sought out new energy supplies. They conserved on energy. And actually, they're doing pretty well. Their natural gas inventories are above pre-pandemic levels, pre-war levels right now. So we're actually seeing some green shoots in some of the European data. And that's going to be a theme that I'm going to come back to with the US as well. This is a chart that shows you the inflation surge. That left-hand side chart shows you core inflation, so even stripping out food and energy. Inflation has surged to 40-year highs in the US, Australia, Canada, the UK, the Euro area, and actually kind of remarkably similar rates. So whatever is happening, it's not particular to one country or one labor market. It's pretty global in scope. Japan remains the outlier, although also Japan with very low inflation. Japan's been in deflation for several decades, more often than not. struggling to get out of it, but they are also seeing a higher rate of inflation. And so the right-hand side chart shows you the central bank response. So after expecting inflation to be transitory, now a dirty word, central banks, including the Federal Reserve, have been raising interest rates extremely rapidly. That was the theme of 2022, was central banks struggling to catch up and get ahead of the inflation dynamics. So that's how we're starting the year. We just had the Bank of Canada this week. They raised their interest rate 25 basis points, but then they signaled that they were going to pause for a while because inflation is starting to turn the corner and their economy is starting to slow and they're seeing better balance in the labor market. So they're actually not going to take further rate hikes off the table, but they're going to take a pause. And we may see the Fed will no doubt raise rates 25 basis points next week, but they may indicate more flexibility going forward depending on how the data unfolds. So this is a chart that shows you the GDP recoveries. Again, 2021 was a year of extremely rapid recovery in almost everywhere except the poor UK, which is suffering from many self-inflicted wounds. But the US certainly had one of the strongest recoveries, one of the most shallowest recessions, even though it was quite deep, but also a very rapid recovery. And then 2022 was a year of, again, the inflation catching up to us and growth slowing as the central bankers slammed on the brakes. So the right-hand side, for many of you might be familiar with purchasing manager indexes. So these are surveys of real business people and asking them about growth, inventories, delivery times, et cetera. And if these indexes are above 50, that's an indication that most industries are growing. And if it's below 50, then most industries are contracting. So you can see that through last year, we kind of globally slowed down and moved into contraction. But the data is very noisy. You can even see that this measure shows the US in contraction, although we're not. And we just had a really good GDP report. So one of the things that's been very challenging as a forecaster is that the data have been wildly disrupted. Just as the economy has been disrupted, collecting data has been disrupted. And we've got lots of cross currents, and reading the tea leaves is harder than usual. But you can see the uptick in the most recent reading. This is a recent reading for the January for some of the countries we have already, and the European data picked up a little bit. So moved back into positive territory, suggesting that, the relief on energy prices is releasing some purchasing power and some resiliency for consumers. Another theme that has been common across countries is the resiliency of labor markets. These are unemployment rates across countries. And of course, different labor markets have different structures. So unemployment is structurally higher in Europe and Canada than it is in the US. But all of these countries are seeing unemployment rates that are still near the lows of the cycle. We really haven't seen the job market stumble yet. We've seen in the US, for example, the tech sector is laying off workers, the mortgage finance sector is laying off workers, but broadly speaking, the job market is still pretty strong. And the unemployment rate in the most recent reading in the US ticked back down to 3.5%. So we've been talking about a recession for almost all of last year, but one of the reliable metrics of a recession is that the unemployment rate rises at least 0.5 percentage point. So we're at 3.5 percentage point. That's been the low of this cycle. It also matches the low of the last 50 years. That's an unemployment rate that signifies that pretty much if you want a job, you can get a job. And the unemployment rate that's left is kind of frictional unemployment, people moving from, if you get laid off in the tech sector, you may have to go to another sector to obtain a job, but you're able to do so. We have not even seen the unemployment rate rise meaningfully here or really even in Europe or Canada or other countries. So labor markets have been extremely resilient. despite the slower growth that we've seen and the tightening in policy. And that's defying our macro models. So one of the things that's been the best news of late is that we are seeing inflation moderate. Inflation is starting to cool off. This left-hand side chart shows you the 3-month, the 6-month, and the 12-month rate of inflation. This is total inflation, including food and energy, so energy prices are contributing a lot to this. But even core inflation has moderated. So just to be clear, inflation is a rate of change. So prices are still higher than they were pre-pandemic. The level of, let's say, car prices is still a lot higher than it was before the pandemic, but they've stopped going up. And used car prices have started to come down. And so that's the first step, is for prices to stop going up and then moderate. And that's not, generally speaking, macroeconomists tend to think that you can't bring inflation down without a rise in unemployment. That's a relationship called the Phillips curve. And yet here we are. We saw inflation that was much worse than any macro model would have predicted in the last couple of years. Now we're seeing inflation performing much better, which just highlights we need to be humble. As economists, we need to talk to our partners in the business sector and understand what's going on the ground, because these relationships are not simple or linear. And one of the things that happened during the pandemic was it was just an epic shock to our economic system. This left-hand side chart shows you goods versus services spending. This is real consumer spending. This is specific to the US. So we're a service sector economy. We spend most of our budgets on services, and then goods is the dark blue line. And you can see that last recession, which is pretty typical, goods spending tends to decline more than services spending in a recession, because it's interest sensitive. If you buy a car, you finance it, and if you buy a home, it's a longer horizon. You need to have confidence to do that. So the first thing you do when you lose confidence is you pull back on things that require financing. That didn't happen in the pandemic, okay? What we saw, because of the nature of the pandemic, we shut down the economy, and you couldn't go get your hair done. You couldn't go out to the movies. You couldn't go out to a restaurant or a sporting game. You couldn't travel. This is a lot of what we spend our money on. And so instead, people hunkered down in their homes and they ordered stuff online. Did anybody do that? And so at one point, spending on goods was 42% above pre-pandemic levels, which is just bananas. That's the official economist term. And supply chains struggled to keep up with that. The surge in goods spending was nothing we had ever seen. And then you add to that the fact that actual operations globally were being disrupted by the pandemic itself. Factories were being shut down, ports were being shut down. It was a nightmare. And what that right-hand side chart does is the Fed put together an index of supply chain functioning, supply chain pressures. That's the blue line in the right-hand side. So you can see that, pre-pandemic, we were kind of bumping along in this sort of nice operational level of supply chains globally. And then the pressures intensified to something we've never seen before. They're coming, and they've come down substantially. Now, I've lined that up with goods inflation. And you can see that as supply chain functioning, it's not back to normal. It's still more pressure and disruption and friction than we had pre-pandemic, but it's a lot better than it was. And that's coinciding with reduced pressure on goods inflation. So again, goods prices have stopped going up, and they've even started coming down a little bit in some categories. So there's two things contributing to reduced goods inflation. One is this improved supply chain backdrop, because again, companies are working hard. All of you are working hard to solve these problems. And when people try to solve problems, they do solve problems. So supply chains are functioning better. That's easing some pressure on input costs. The other thing that's happening, look what's happening to consumer goods spending. We're tired of stuff. So we want to go out. There's been a theme last year was revenge travel. You know, everybody wanted to go out and take a trip or catch up on delayed weddings or all kinds of going out and spending on services. So services spending is finally recovering almost back to pre-pandemic trends, not quite though, and goods spending is declining. So consumers are more price sensitive. During the pandemic, we could only buy a certain slice of things, so we were willing to pay whatever because we couldn't spend money on anything else. Now people, one, that stimulus is behind us, and you can spend your money on services too. And people are demanding a little bit more of a negotiation when they part with their money. And we saw this in the holiday shopping season. We had the most promotional holiday shopping season than we've had in years. So I hope you all got some good discounts because they were out there to be had. And so that's a combination of consumer behavior and supply chain functioning that's starting to give us some relief on inflation. There's another route to lower inflation, and that's compressed profit margins. So this is a chart that tracks analyst forecasts of the S&P 500 earnings growth. And it's, you know, analysts always start by projecting 9 to 10% growth. That's kind of the standard. And then this chart shows how the actual earnings growth evolves and until we realize that earnings growth in reality. So I've circled where we are on analyst growth forecasts for 2023. That's the red line. So you can see that in the pandemic, which is 2021, 2022, 2021 we had a surge in profit growth. Record profit margins for many sectors. And then 2022 was a pretty solid year for profit growth. 2023 is a harder road on profits. Overall, analysts are expecting barely positive, less than 1% growth for the S&P 500, and sectors like consumer discretionary and consumer staples, energy and materials, healthcare, and tech, the tech sector, are all expecting outright declines in earnings. So again, that increased price sensitivity by consumers is forcing some absorption of reduced margins on the part of firms from very elevated levels, and that might, again, force them to find better, more productive ways and operational efficiencies, which could be good for the functioning of the overall economy. It's been a rough year last year for markets, so just a quick run through the markets and where we might go from here. The left-hand side there shows you a valuation metric for the stock market that I like very much. Is the Case-Shiller cyclically adjusted. It takes earnings forecasts, it averages them over time, and it adjusts for inflation, and it adjusts for interest rates. And you can see that you can see the 90s bubble by this metric was clearly a bubble that burst. You can see the COVID bubble. We did see very elevated valuations. We went through a pretty significant correction in the stock market last year. And, you know, valuations right now are still elevated. It's going to be a rough road, as we just saw with profits. But we're at least back to valuations that look a little bit more sensible. So perhaps, while I expect it to be a very volatile year in the market, some of the worst of the outright correction may be behind us. You can see the right-hand chart shows you the 10-year yield. That flows through to mortgages. We saw a huge surge last year. We saw mortgages go up to 7.5%. More recently, as there's been good news on inflation, we've seen that yield come down a little bit. We've seen mortgages come down to 6%. But the reality is that probably interest rates are going to be higher this cycle than they were last cycle, barring a recession. I do not have a recession for the US. I think we have a near miss, that we will stay in growth that's below trend, but in the 1%, 1.5% area. And if that is the case, then probably the Fed might ultimately stop raising and cut back interest rates towards the end of the year, but interest rates will stay higher. And if interest rates are higher, so, mortgage rates have come down to 6% from 7.5%, but they're still twice what they were at the lows of the pandemic. That's more expensive financing. This is a measure of house prices across countries. House prices just appreciated so rapidly, and they are correcting in some places. They are starting to correct in the areas that were most bubbly. I still think we're going to have a rough year for housing valuations. I think there's more correction that lies ahead of us. It doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense for housing to be this much more expensive than it was pre-pandemic. The dollar is something that affects global businesses like many of you work in, and actually that has, some of the pressure has come off the dollar. We saw the dollar appreciate just extraordinarily rapidly last year as the Fed was the fastest interest rate hiker on the planet. Now that pressure is coming off. So I would expect that to continue to moderate in terms of the dollar. Thematically, there's a lot of talk on a structural basis about deglobalization being a headwind. And what the IMF says, which I agree with, is it's not deglobalization. The left-hand side there shows you global trade as a percent of GDP. We are still trading. We still have global supply chains. It's more about resiliency and reorientation of those supply chains. That takes some time to implement. Redundancies are more expensive. So you raise your prices, but once you've stopped raising them, then you can hold at that level. But global fragmentation and geopolitical tensions are probably a permanent feature of our landscape for the foreseeable future. The right-hand side shows you another theme is, and you touched on workforce development. We have shrinking populations in many parts of the world. We have in the US barely positive population growth. Even in areas that have been very rapid population growth like India and China. China's got negative population growth. India's got much slower. So the world is seeing slower demographic growth. That means we need to turn more towards workforce development and being better and more efficient at what we do to get the growth that we want. So those are a couple of structural themes. And then I will just, and actually I'm not gonna go through the conclusion slide because I can see I'm out of time, but as president of NABE, as the National Association of Business Economists, I wanna point out this slide. This is a new page on our website. I know we've got a lot of people that are either graduates or students in the Certified Business Economist program. Does anybody want to put your hands up? The CBE program, I see some over there. Fantastic. It's a great program. University of Arkansas has been such an important partner for NABE, and the program is so strong and robust. If you're looking to hire an economist, look to that program. And if you're either a student or you know a student in economics, we are building resources for students to know how to select a career path in economics. There's lots of ones you might not be aware of, to actually access internship opportunities, which we will have a posting on our site to show you how to build an economics resume and do an economics interview and some opportunities for networking. So please share this with anybody that you know that's a budding economist, and give us feedback if you've got it. And with that, I will turn it over to our I'll turn it back over for the next introduction.
Thank you, Julia, for sure. That was awesome. So, our next speaker is John List. He is the chief economist at Walmart and the Kenneth C. Griffin Distinguished Service Professor in Economics at the University of Chicago. His research focuses on combining field experiments with economic theory to deepen our understanding of economic science. This research has led to collaborative work with several different schools and charities, as well as firms, including, and stick with me here, Lyft, Uber, United Airlines, Virgin Airlines, Humana, Sears, Kmart, Facebook, Google, General Motors, Tinder, Citadel, Walmart, of course, and several nonprofits. He co-authored the international bestseller, The Y-Axis, W-H-Y, in 2013, and is author of the new bestseller, The Voltage Effect. List was elected a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences in 2011 and a fellow of the Econometric Society in 2015. Please help me welcome John to the 2023 Business Forecast Luncheon. Thank you.
Okay, it's great to be here. Todd, thank you very much for that kind intro. And I first want to do a shout out. So the shout out is to Dean Waller. I want to deeply thank you for welcoming me to the community. And a lot of you might not know this, but Dean Waller is amongst the very top business school deans in the world. He's transforming how administrators think about doing business, a vision and a growth mindset. And it's just been so wonderful to take on your friendship. And it's so wonderful to be here, okay? So enough about you, let's talk about me. Now, you heard in the intro that I do field experiments. And you might wonder, what in the world is a field experiment? And who are John's subjects in his field experiments? Okay, let me learn a little bit about you. I want you to raise your hand if you have voted in one of the past 2 presidential elections. Please raise your hand. Wow. Most of you are lying, my research would say, but nevertheless, you're raising your hand. Raise your hand if you have taken an Uber or Lyft in the past 7 years. Please raise your hand. Okay. I may have gotten everyone. Has anyone not raised their hand once? At least once? Okay, there's a hand up. Raise your hand if you have used Google to search. I'm looking at you. Is your hand going up? Okay. I was going to say my therapist is right out in the hall if you want some help. Look, I want to thank all of you because all of you have been subjects in one of my experiments at least. Okay? It's not creepy in the sense that I can tell you how you as an individual behaves. But what I can tell you is what are the best nudges to use to increase voter participation should we want to do that. I can tell you what are the best ways to get all of you to tip your Uber or Lyft driver. Speaking of that, raise your hand if you tip your driver on Uber and Lyft every time. Raise your hand. Wow. You are a very impressive group because in my data, only 1% of people tip on every trip. 3 out of 5 people never ever tip. Yes, I said that correctly. 3 out of 5 people never ever tip. But when I look at those 3 out of 5 people who never ever tip on Uber and Lyft and I put them in a yellow cab, where at the end of the trip, they settle up in cash, guess what happens now? 95% of them tip. That tells you something about humanity, and that's really what I do. I do behavioral economics. I use the world as my lab, and I try to use economics to understand how we can make the world a better place. I take on questions like, why do inner city schools continue to fail? Why do men continue to earn more money in labor markets than women? Why do people commit to charitable causes and give resources for philanthropic purposes? Why do people discriminate against one another? Why do our ideas that look great in the Petri dish, why do they so often fail when we scale them up? And why aren't we changing the world using social science? Those are the types of questions that motivate me every day. Okay? Now, I should actually go to why I'm here, and I'm going to change gears a little bit and be a macroeconomist. Okay, there's going to be a big caveat to start. I am a novice. These are the experts. Okay, so I will look at the data and look at the economy and think about where we're going as a microeconomist. Now this afternoon I'll be flying to San Francisco. As soon as the person next to me notices my earbuds are out, they will ask me, "What do you do?" And I'll say, "I'm an economist." And you know the question that is coming. Are we in a recession? And the next question will be, well, if not, are we going to be in a recession? Okay, so let's talk about what a recession actually means. Most of the time, we shorthand and say, you know what? It's 2 consecutive negative quarters of economic growth. That's how we shorthand things. The NBER, which I'm a member of, has a definition that it's not only that, which we've had, you can look at the screen here, we did have 2 consecutive quarters of negative economic growth, but it's not only that, it's also what is happening in the broader economy. So what I've happened to do for today's lecture is I've gone back and I've looked at the 10 recessions since World War II. So the NBER has said there have been 10 recessions since World War II. Other people say 13, but I'm using the strict NBER definition. And I thought about 5 facts that have accompanied every one of those recessions. And I want to talk about those as 5 recessionary facts today. And that's going to give us the basis for how to think about making predictions for the future. Okay, so I'm going to give you a freebie. The average recession since World War II has lasted about 17 months. I won't count that as one of my 5, though. Fact number 1. From the start of every post-war recession, and often in the months prior, the unemployment rate has always risen. This is called Oken's Law. Arthur Oken was an economist at Yale in the mid-20th century working on looking at mounds and mounds of data, and he found this correlation. When you look at the current labor market, as Julia mentioned, it looks very different in the market of labor that we have in most recessions. For example, since the beginning of 2022, the unemployment rate has actually dropped from 4% to 3.5%. It hasn't risen. What's happening today is very different in terms of Oken's Law and an understanding of what's happening in our broader economy. Fact 2. Job openings tend to plummet early in recessions and hires follow suit. For example, look at the dot-com bubble. Job openings decreased by about 2 million. Look at the Great Recession, about 2 million. Look at the COVID recession, 2.3 million. Now, as Julia mentioned, there's a lot of negative news today about layoffs. Some of my friends, I used to be the chief economist at Uber, and after that I was a chief economist at Lyft. A lot of my friends have been laid off. But these are sectors and areas of the economy that have grown tremendously. The broader economy is not seeing job openings plummet. The current hiring rate is still above. If you look at the 2010 to 2019 average, we're still above that today. What's happening with job openings today is very different than what has happened in the past. Fact 3, underemployment, and I'll define that in a moment, underemployment rises during recessions. So underemployment, I want you to think about it as follows. People want full-time work, but they have to settle for part-time work. That's underemployment. Look at the Great Recession. The number of people who wanted full-time work but were forced to settle for part-time, that actually rose by roughly 4.5 million people during the Great Recession. Today, underemployment is the lowest it's been in the past 20 years. And here's a figure to show you. You can see what happened from 2008 to 2010. You can see the sliver around COVID recession. But look at where we are now in terms of underemployment. It is amazingly and brilliantly positive. Fact number 3, in the labor market also does not accord with a typical recession. Fact number 4, if you look at wage growth tends to slow during recessions. So look around 2004, it fell from 5.3% to 3.3%. Look later on, it fell from 4.1 to 1.6 in 2010. Every time it's like clockwork looking at wage growth. Now, when you look at wage growth in today's economy, it did dip between Q2 and Q3. That's a fact. But at its current level, 5.3%, that's higher than at any point in the past 20 years. And again, just look at the data from the BLS, and it tells the story that fact 4 is also not in the data. You can see what happened around 2008 to 2010. You can see we had a quick downturn in the COVID recession, but you look now, you're like, holy cow, this labor market is running hot. And this is what has the Fed's attention, of course. The labor market is running red hot. Fact number 5, the percentage of people in the labor force generally declines during recessions. So we're talking about participation rates now. So when you look at the most recent data, it has grown consistently in 2021, and it's largely flat today. There is no decline in labor force participation. These are full-time, okay? But again, fact number 5 is completely at odds with the past 10 recessions that we have, let's say, observed since World War II. Okay, those are the facts and some underpinnings of what's happening in our economy. So let's talk about the bottom line now and talk about where I think we're going. Now, it's easy to imagine the labor market going from what I would call white hot in 2021 to red hot in 2022. You can see what's happening in terms of the Fed, which is trying to engineer a very soft landing and to have a softer labor market, but still a really robust labor market and robust economic growth in 2023. You can actually see how that is a possibility where 6 months, 9 months, 12 months ago, it was hard to envision that. When you looked at our data through the supply chain and you saw all the supply side inflation that was coming, that was difficult to actually imagine that something like this could happen, but it's becoming a little bit more, let's say, possible, and I'm a little bit more optimistic. Now, if you talk about where we're going, the second part of the question, are we going to a recession? It's actually really hard for me to imagine the labor market going into a deep freeze, and for me to envision we're going to have 2 consecutive quarters of negative economic growth, and combining all of that to say that there's a recession coming. It's right now, of course, shocks can happen, but right now it's difficult to see that in the data. And when I say in the data, I'm talking about publicly available data. I am not talking about Walmart data, okay? Let's be very clear on that. I don't want to get fired for today. Now, the big question is, there are unobservables like unanticipated shocks that can happen not only domestically, regionally, but also internationally. These are very difficult to predict. We know that. But the real variable here is how much water will the Fed throw on the economy? Now, my best guess is, I agree with Julia, I think next week we're going to have what's anticipated. But sort of where we go, is it going to tip at 4.75? Is it going to tip at 5? That might be a good prediction. Now, with all this in mind, let's talk about my forecast. And this is what I'm going to call the big reveal. That's it. That's what I could get Walmart to approve me to talk about today. But here's what I can tell you. After I could not get a bunch of slides approved to come and talk to you, I decided to do a little different kind of analysis. Here's what I did. There are all kinds of economic forecasts. You don't know what to believe, right? It's impossible to know. There is a market for forecasts. So here's what I did. I looked at the 15 indicators that you're all filling out, and I went to the 30 best forecasters in the past, and I looked at the distribution of guesses. I can tell you that my guess is optimistic. I was in the 75th percentile for the variables that are the good stuff. The variables that are the bad stuff, I was in the 25th percentile. So I am in general, when you look forward at data that might be coming, I'm in general more optimistic than the market for forecasters would suggest the forecasters are in terms of optimistic. Okay? Now, in this way, it's always important to understand really about, what is, let me see here, I want to do this one. With all of these economic forecasts, it's really important to remember about how can we learn from them. And I'm urging you to learn from them by looking at the suite of estimates. Do a weighted average. Put the weights that you think are important or applicable for the various indicators. And in the end, you're going to have a pretty good measure of the best guess going forward. Now, why I say that is because I actually think about the first law of economic forecasting, which is for every economic prediction, there exists an equal and opposite economic prediction. Now, the second law is they're both wrong. So we should always understand it's a basket of forecasts that is based on some variables that people are guessing about. And when Todd talked about early on, I talked completely about the labor market. He talked about 3 very important features of regional and state and let's say domestic and international markets, and what important features are good for economies. All of them are fundamentally tied to the labor market. And that's why it's so important to focus on the labor market when we think about the economic outcomes of all of us, of the citizenry. Now, I'm going to leave you and say, never forget, astrology was invented so economic forecasting would seem like an accurate science. Thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to your questions.
That was great. Thanks, John. All right. It is now my pleasure to introduce Mervin Jebaraj. Mervin is the director of the Center for Business and Economic Research. He is an exceptional source of business and economics-related expertise that journalists and business people alike rely on to understand how national and regional issues impact the state of Arkansas. Mervin is a member of the Board of Directors of the National Association of Business Economics, the Community Development Advisory Council of the St. Louis Federal Reserve, the Northwest Arkansas National Airport, and the Walton Arts Center. Please welcome Mervin to the podium.
Thank you, Todd, and thank you to our forecasters for your wonderful forecasts. I know we had our work set out for us, so for once the weather forecasters were actually accurate and they predicted snow and we got the snow. They predicted a lot of snow and somehow we managed to get all of that snow, so now all of a sudden we're competing with weather forecasters for trying to be accurate. Some of you were without power, I think, for the past few days, so we've served you a hot meal. Hope that helps. Showers are next door if you need those. We also, you should be around the dessert course here. Unfortunately, this year your desserts are eggless. There was no way we could get 1,000 eggs for all of you in here. Not in this economy, anyway. I'm kidding, we splurged. We got you eggs in your desserts this year. I think, I was thinking back about what I would want to talk about, and I looked back to what we said in 2020, which I know seems like a long time ago. It was only 3 years ago. And that was before the pandemic, in case you're wondering how long ago that was. I was thinking about what I'd said then, and we talked about where the economy was. So we'd come through fairly strong economy and through most of the 2010s, especially the later 2010s. We were booming, inflation was really low, unemployment rates were really low, and it seemed like we were heading for the roaring 20s. The only thing roaring, it turned out, was COVID, and then inflation after that. So I feel like, most people feel one way or the other that the pandemic is over and might be endemic. We're still dealing with some amount of inflation. So I thought about what we could say that is still accurate from what I said in 2020, that'd still be worthwhile mentioning in 2023. So I usually talk about the unemployment rate or GDP to start with. So I'll talk about the unemployment rate. Our unemployment rate is currently at roughly the same as the United States unemployment rate. We reached a record low in the spring of last year. I think I've stood up here every year and said we reached the record low. And then the Bureau of Labor Statistics revises the data and that record low is gone. So it's back again this year. Julia, you're on the committee advising them, tell them to stop doing that because I keep doing this every year and people are going to think I'm wrong every year. It is me. But since about March, when it was 3.1%, it's gone up now to about 3.6%. So ever since the Federal Reserve started raising rates, the unemployment rate here climbed ever so slightly. So about a 0.5% increase in the unemployment rate through to the end of 2022. And if you look at the regions, around, the metros in the state of Arkansas, you can look here. The very top line there is Pine Bluff. The very bottom line is Northwest Arkansas. Northwest Arkansas never got to the record low unemployment rate. The record low unemployment rate was in the 90s. It was about 2.1%. We got to 2.2%, so we got really close but didn't get to a record low unemployment rate in Northwest Arkansas. But still, today the unemployment rate in Northwest Arkansas is 2.5%. Jonesboro is right after that, and then Central Arkansas, Fort Smith, Hot Springs, and Pine Bluff, where you see the unemployment rates that are a lot higher in Pine Bluff and in Hot Springs. So Hot Springs unemployment rate is about 1% higher than where they were before they entered the pandemic. So it gives you some indication of the hospitality-focused industry in Hot Springs still struggling to some extent. And then Pine Bluff's unemployment rate is about 0.5% higher than where they were before they entered the pandemic. Well, we entered the pandemic, not just them. Unemployment is just part of the picture. The other, employment is all the people looking for work that couldn't find work. The labor force is everybody working and everybody looking for work. And if you look at this particular chart that's indexed to February of 2020 before the pandemic started, and looks at labor force growth since then, you can see that Northwest Arkansas's labor force has recovered from the pandemic and has gone beyond it. Not significantly, but to some extent. No other metro area in Arkansas or the state as a whole has recovered labor force from before the pandemic. And you'll see that roughly until March of this year, they were all headed in the trajectory to get to that red line, which would indicate that their labor force is on par with where it was in February 2020. And none of the other metro areas reached it. If you look at a longer term perspective for our metro areas and the state as a whole, this is indexed to the last recession in 2009. Central Arkansas, Jonesboro, and Northwest Arkansas have essentially carried the labor force growth in the state of Arkansas. The state of Arkansas is the light blue line in the middle that is basically on par with the red line, which indicates that it's on par with December 2007's labor force participation. And then beyond that, you see Hot Springs is still lower than that, Fort Smith, and then Pine Bluff. And those three metro areas, they lost labor force during the time when Northwest Arkansas, Central Arkansas, and Jonesboro was growing fairly significantly in the mid-2010s. So I put this up to say that, it looks like if you look at the big meta stats for the state of Arkansas, it looks like we've recovered from the pandemic. The unemployment rate is low, but that really is telling the story of three metro areas in our state, and not the other three metro areas in our state where the unemployment and labor force haven't quite recovered yet. So when we talk about employment for the state as a whole, you see some fairly large numbers there. We lost about 35,000 jobs. The next year we gained 35,000 jobs. And then the next year we gained about 34,000 jobs, which is fairly significant. Before we entered the pandemic, the job growth was typically in the state of Arkansas about 15,000 to 17,000 jobs each year, net increase in the state of Arkansas. So we lost 35,000 jobs when we should have gained about 15,000 jobs. The next year we gained the jobs we lost the previous year. And then this year we gained 2 years worth of growth that we missed out on. So there's still one more year's worth of 15,000 to 17,000 jobs that we haven't gained back. So keep that in mind as we look through the rest of the metro areas in the state of Arkansas. You look at the, I do have to do a forecast of employment in the state of Arkansas, and you'll see the first thing that you note about this line is that it's razorback red, or close enough to it, I think. And then the second thing you notice that it's positive, like our other forecasters. I am, predicting, I was looking for a different word from soft landing. The best I could come up with, a razorback pet plush pillow, kind of a soft landing is what. And why am I, fairly confident that we're headed for a soft landing and not a recession? It's because the Houston Astros beat the Philadelphia Phillies at the World Series. So better than sheep's entrails for prediction, better than astrology. Baseball tea leaves is what we have. So every time the Phillies have won the World Series, there's been a recession or a financial crisis. So this is a fact. And so I don't think anybody's ever said, thank you, Houston, but I'm saying it right now. So there you go. Which brings me to where we expect some of this growth to show up. I didn't put out a number, but like something around 11,000, 12,000 jobs that were expected in the next year, which is lower than our normal trajectory for the state of Arkansas. You can see where we grew in the last year. Leisure and hospitality, these are still gains from the jobs we lost during the pandemic. Trade, transportation, utilities, especially in central Arkansas, we'll see manufacturing growth, especially in food processing, financial activities, a lot of activity in the real estate sector, at least through the first half of last year. Professional business services, most of that growth happened in Northwest Arkansas. But at the very top, you see information. Information is a fairly small sector. It has everything in it, from newspaper jobs to TV and radio reporters to web developers and coders and those types of jobs. And also a very, booming but nascent film and TV industry in the state of Arkansas. So we've shot a lot of movies in the state of Arkansas recently, a lot of TV shows in the state of Arkansas recently. I'm looking around the room. I know some of you have signed up to be extras in some of these TV shows and movies. I signed up to, or at least I tried to sign up to be an extra in a TV show, but I was looking for an easy job, one that I wouldn't have to do a lot. I just wanted to lay down flat for a while. I signed up for a job as a cadaver, background cadaver number 3 in a morgue. I didn't get it. My dreams of movie stardom are dead now. But there are a lot of jobs here, and we're projecting, a lot of additional movies and TVs, and people, that do these kinds of jobs tend to travel around the country a whole lot. And Northwest Arkansas has, at least comparatively to where they're coming from, provided a more affordable place to call a home base that they can use to then travel around for their work as well. But in all seriousness, when we think about where we expect these jobs to come from, something that the governor has announced recently, the formation of an outdoor economy task force, something that we've worked on here in Northwest Arkansas, that we're trying to develop for the state as a whole. This stat shows you the compound annual growth rate in employment in the outdoor economy from 2012 to 2021, which is the most recent data that we have. We're in that dark blue section. We're actually ranked 6th in this metric nationwide. That indicates, obviously, we have, as Todd mentioned, we're the natural state. We have a lot of hunting, fishing, mountain biking, kayaking. We need to get to the next step where you can kayak and fish at the same time and mountain bike and hunt at the same time or something. Don't do that, it sounds dangerous. But we're number 6 here in this metric. Before we entered the pandemic, we were number 19 in the nation. So some of this might be that our economy opened up sooner than some of the states out west. But predictably where you expect to see outdoor economy jobs is out west. It's traditionally where that's been. The one thing that surprised me and probably surprises most of you is Indiana is actually ranked number 1, remains ranked number 1 in the outdoor economy. And if you're thinking, if you're like me, you're like, what's in Indiana? The best I know about it is it's between Illinois and Ohio. I can't think of anything else. They make all the RVs there, so huge employment opportunity for the state of Indiana is RV production, and that has improved since the last recession, so they continue to be ranked number 1. The other thing where we would expect to see employment growth in Arkansas is, regardless of how much we talk about workforce training and so on and so forth, Arkansas continues to rank near the bottom in educational attainment as pertains to number of people with a bachelor's degree or higher, and then close to the bottom for number of people with an associate's degree. And if you look at the employment gains over the last several years, this only goes up to 2018, the top 2 categories are people with bachelor's degrees or people with an associate degree or some college or certificate program. Only after that, it's less than high school, and then a high school degree is all the way at the bottom for just about 7,000 jobs gained. So it is still very important to try to get as many people into 2-year programs and 4-year programs. That tends to be, if you look at the best performing states, the best performing metros, that tends to be where the job growth continues to be, and that's something we need to continue working on here in the state of Arkansas. And looking around again at the metro areas, similar story to unemployment rate. There are some metro areas doing a lot better than other metro areas. This is indexed to February of 2020, right before the pandemic started, and basically gives you an idea which metro areas have gained back the employment from the pandemic and gone beyond it. At the very top there, Northwest Arkansas, yellow line is Jonesboro. The orange line is Central Arkansas, and then you have Hot Springs, Pine Bluff, and Fort Smith around that red line, which indicates that they're on par. Pine Bluff clearly has not gotten back all their employment yet. Again, this is looking at a longer term perspective, going back to the previous recession in 2007. This is how far back it looks like. Again, same story, Northwest Arkansas, Central Arkansas, Jonesboro, have been carrying the state for most of the 2010s when employment was booming, 15 to 17,000 jobs net increase every single year. And Pine Bluff at the bottom there and Hot Springs and Fort Smith are still below where they were in 2007, which is still a concern for those regions. Looking at the largest metro area in our state, in central Arkansas, you can see that they've just about gained back all the jobs they lost during the recession. They used to grow 3,000 to 4,000 jobs each year before the pandemic. So it looks like they've gained the jobs they lost during the pandemic, but not really the jobs that they could have been growing during the pandemic. Look at which sectors those job increases are. A big one there, leisure and hospitality on top. That's largely because they did not gain the leisure and hospitality jobs in 2021. They mostly gained them back in 2022. So what you're looking at leisure and hospitality is not necessarily new investments in the leisure and hospitality industry, more than it is simply gaining back the jobs that were lost in 2020. The second sector, the largest growth there, they see trade, transportation, utilities. What it does not say is warehousing. And so another large online retailer whom we shall not name has a huge distribution facility there, which is why you see the job increases in that particular sector. Information, again, as I mentioned, it's not just TV news reporters and coders, but movies as well. Manufacturing has grown in central Arkansas, and then healthcare and education, which is mostly healthcare in central Arkansas, which is, again, a fairly large industry for the middle part of our state. And then looking around to some of the other metro areas, at the top left there is Fort Smith, just about got to even from the jobs that they lost from the pandemic. But again, as I'd mentioned, taking a longer term perspective, they're still well below where they were from the last recession in 2007. I did note that the manufacturing job losses, which had continued essentially all the way from 2010 till the pandemic, have finally stopped and is increasing again. So they're headed on the right track. If you've been to downtown Fort Smith recently, you'll see a lot of new murals, a lot of new businesses. We drove by there last weekend, and there were a lot of people on Garrison Avenue, which is not something that you had seen in the last 10 years. So there's a lot of investment to try to get people and jobs to Fort Smith, so we'll be looking for that. Jonesboro continues to be the second fastest growing area of our state. Obviously, they've gained back their jobs from the recession, but not necessarily gained back the jobs that they would have had the pandemic not happened. Hot Springs there, again, very close to getting back all the jobs from the pandemic, but again, very hospitality focused. They're not getting the convention businesses that they used to get coming to their region, and there's, this is an area where the outdoor economy could be useful for Hot Springs. It's obviously around a lot of beautiful natural areas, and that's an area that Hot Springs could really use to grow their economy. And at the bottom right there, you see Pine Bluff. They continued to lose jobs over a longer period of time, have not gained back the jobs that they lost during the pandemic. We were looking for, an increase in leisure and hospitality jobs in Pine Bluff. They'd opened a new casino. We haven't quite seen that yet. Unfortunately, the casino opened right in the middle of the pandemic, so it's kind of thrown a wrench in the works in that sense. Which brings us to Northwest Arkansas, where we are. Again, we seem to be performing really well. We lost about 3,300 jobs during the pandemic. The next year, we gained about 11,000, and then in this most recent year, we gained close to 14,000 jobs. We were growing about 5,000 to 7,000-ish jobs every year before the pandemic, so unlike any other metro area of our state or the state as a whole, not only have we gained all the jobs we lost during the pandemic, but we also gained back the jobs we would have had the pandemic not happened in Northwest Arkansas. So it still continues to be the leading economy in the state, drawing in people from all over the country, all over the world even. I'll point you to this particular section there at the end. So you'll see the pandemic happened, decline in employment, a big increase in employment after that. Here's a zoomed in version of that. Strong upward trajectory, and then very recently you've seen some job declines in Northwest Arkansas. This momentum and then downturn is very much similar to the Hogs basketball team. Strong momentum, recently some downturn. So it was going to affect my forecast, but then they beat LSU, so my forecast improved. Northwest Arkansas's job growth is also going to be positive. Not as positive as it has been in previous years, so just under 5,000 jobs expected in this upcoming year. So again, keeping along that theme of a soft landing going through all of our presentations, actually. And then you look at which particular sectors had job growth in the last year. And we would expect to see that. You see, professional business services, which is most of you in this room here, been the fastest growing part of the Northwest Arkansas economy for several years, continues to be that. And you see that massive increase in employment in that particular sector. Trade, transportation, utilities is our second largest sector and second fastest growth. Again, some information sector growth there as well. A little less on the movies, more on the coding and developing type jobs there. Government is mostly local school teachers here, so obviously with a fast-growing region, we need a lot of teachers to teach our kids. And then leisure and hospitality, you don't see as strong growth in this sector compared to the state or central Arkansas. We actually gained most of our leisure and hospitality jobs in 2021. Obviously, we lost a bunch of jobs from the pandemic and Chad Morris before that, but Sam Pittman fixed it last year and continued that trend this year. Manufacturing jobs continue to improve here. Financial activities, again, through at least half of this year, as you'll see here in the next few slides, real estate was booming in Northwest Arkansas. And then construction has declined some. The pace of construction has declined some with rates going up, interest rates going up, and supply chain issues in that particular sector. Which brings us to talking about housing. Todd mentioned this, I think I've mentioned this. There's just no way to talk about growth in Northwest Arkansas without talking about housing in Northwest Arkansas. If you're wondering if, the housing market has slowed down since, I think in March of this year, interest rates were 3%. Now they're, 6 something. In Northwest Arkansas, has that slowed down the housing market? It's certainly slowed down the number of homes sold in Northwest Arkansas. So if you look at this, it shows you, since 2018, the number of homes sold. Very clearly, in the second half of this year, the number of homes sold has declined compared to 2020 and 2021. But if you're looking at 2018 or 2019, which were still really good years for the housing market, and good depending on how you look at it, but fast-growing years in the housing market in Northwest Arkansas, it's not clear that the number of homes sold is lower than 2018 or 2019. So if anything, we've just gone back to 2018 and 2019 when housing affordability was still a concern in Northwest Arkansas. And if you're wondering, nationally we've seen home prices decline. We haven't seen that yet in Northwest Arkansas. So all the way through to the end of 2022, again, a very clear trend. Home prices peaked in the middle of last year and then have stayed essentially a little bit lower than that and flattened. So compared to last year for each of those months, we're still significantly higher, our home prices, than 2021, significantly higher than 2022, certainly higher than 2018 or 2019. So in the first half of last year, our home prices had gone up about 30%, which was very significant. In previous years, in 21, it had gone up 15%, which was a lot. And in 18 and 19, it was going up 7-8%, which is when we started complaining about housing affordability. So we still have a lot of work to be done here. So the first question anybody asks is, why are home prices still going up? And the easy answer people are looking for often is it investors? It's not investors. By and large, investors are not a bigger share of the overall home buying market compared to previous decades even, or even in the 2010s right after the pandemic. What investors are there in the market tend to be smaller than larger investors. So the easy answer is that it's not investors, which means that we have more difficult reasons why home prices continue to increase in Northwest Arkansas. By and large, it's because our population is growing. So our economy is growing here. People want to move to Northwest Arkansas. I have here the population growth in the past several years. We never built enough housing to accommodate all these people. You see a lot of apartments being built. Since about 2012, we've only added about 12,000 units for non-students and only 6,000 beds for students. So that's not a lot of units in apartments for Northwest Arkansas, and their vacancy rate is under 2% there. So we continue to see home prices stay at a really high level in Northwest Arkansas, which means we have a lot of work to do. We're doing some of that work within our cities, within the regions. One thing that we haven't quite done is obviously the biggest influence on home prices and home development tends to be city policy. The second biggest development driver is someone that we don't think about, is school districts. So where schools decide to locate their schools determines the development pattern around them. because they're separate political entities here in Arkansas and many places, school districts make decisions independent of cities, cities make decisions independent of school districts. Some of you are here from school districts, some of you are from cities. If I found you, I put you at the same table because y'all need to talk to each other. Okay, we talk about denser, compact housing development to get transit-oriented at some point. And we think about what should anchor those. Maybe schools should anchor denser, compact development so you don't have the 3:30 congestion, people waiting to get in cars, they can get in their bikes, they can get in those electric scooters, they can walk from more compact neighborhoods. And it helps the schools as well. There's, all of our cities are sort of landlocked by other cities. So unless you want to engage in hostile annexations of other cities, there's only so much taxable base for property tax. So what you want to do is increase the value of the remaining land. And you do that by denser, compact neighborhoods. The last thing I want to talk about is inflation as it affects us here in Northwest Arkansas. This is inflation rate for our region, which is West, South, Central. We're not in the Southeast according to census. But we're still in the SEC, and so is Texas now. So, not Oklahoma though. So we're at the second highest rate of inflation last year. Obviously the Mountain West has the highest rate of inflation. The coasts actually have lower rates of inflation than the middle part of the country. It is driven by the similar things that we've talked about so far. People moved to the south during the pandemic, that pushed home prices up. And we have a lot less transit here in the middle part of the country than they do on the coast. So when gas prices go up, we immediately feel it. Now, obviously, there's some relief here. After 15 months of high inflation, we have the first reading of deflation. Maybe what we should have done is appointed Tom Brady to the Federal Reserve earlier. Could have got this sooner. Well, thank you very much. And if you have your questions written, put them on those green cards. Someone will be around to collect them, and we'll take your questions.
Okay, so please do hand your green cards in. I do have a few questions to get us started quickly. So, John, you gave us a little preview, but I'd like to ask each of you and we'll just go Julia, John, Mervin. So what will the Fed do? And when will they stop?
So in my forecast, we've got, after next week, we'll have one more rate hike in March. And then they'll pause and, based on inflation that continues to moderate, and an economy that is growing slowly. So they want to see growth slow. We are seeing growth slow. And then I think by the end of the year, they'll actually be able to cut interest rates towards the end of the year. Because again, if inflation continues to moderate, you don't need to stay at 5%. You can come down to 4 or 3.5, and that's still a reasonable interest rate. It's not stimulative in that environment. So that's my forecast.
Yeah, so thanks for the question. We're throwing darts. So I'm going to say that next week there will be a rate rise, and I think it's going to peak at 5. I can't predict in the second half that there will actually be rate cuts, but I think the peak will be 5 is my best guess.
I'm going to be different just to be difficult, I guess. I know for 5.25, I think, is where their median projection is now. So that's 3 rate hikes. So 2 in the next few meetings, and then 1 sometime later, just to kick us while we're down.
You're always difficult, Mervin. Great. So Julia, so I'm going to do a 2-part question. You talked a little bit about Europe and then the Russian-Ukraine situation. What about the BRICS, if you will, and how do you see their economies going forward?
So BRICS being Brazil, Russia,
yeah.
India, China. So very different set of circumstances than when the term BRIC was coined. So when the term BRIC was coined, it was that these 4 very large countries were in growth mode all at the same time, kind of beginning to have a much more meaningful impact driving global growth. Brazil actually is in pretty good shape. Latin America has managed the inflation surge. They were a bit ahead of the curve. It's something that they've been familiar with in the past. So when they saw it, they acted early to raise interest rates. They're seeing inflation come down. So they're actually well poised to recover some growth momentum this year. Russia obviously is not doing well economically and is going to be increasingly isolated and turning inward. China, I touched on some of the struggles that they're facing structurally. They have already sort of accepted that they're going to be moving to a much lower growth rate. You know, China in the last 20 years was growing at 10%, just phenomenal growth rates and really, really driving the global manufacturing cycle in particular. That is behind us. They're going to look more like an advanced economy growing 3 to 5%. And that's in a good scenario. They still have this housing credit overhang that they need to navigate in the next few years. India is actually demographically, you know, one of the most vibrant economies, one of the youngest, fastest growing economies, and has been doing reasonably well. So I would say the BRICS story has become far more nuanced, and the outlook for each of these 4 countries is quite different.
Great, I appreciate it. So, John, you've written an entire book on this subject, but if you could give us a few quick words. We have startups in the room, and there's a lot of great startups in Northwest Arkansas. What advice do you have for them in this economic environment? And yeah, go out and read his book, everybody.
Yeah, I like that. I was going to say, let's think about what the wisdom of Dean Waller suggested at the beginning, which is go by the voltage effect. So that's a start. But look, I think our backbone of our economy has always been entrepreneurship. And when you think about job creation, it starts and ends with innovation. And I think ideas should be viewed, and scaling should be viewed as a science. I think for many years, we have looked at ideas and we've looked at policies, and when they work in the small, we don't use science to try to think about how do I need to adjust my idea to make sure it works in the large. And the book is filled with examples because I just grew tired of great idea after great idea, whether it's education, whether it's in health, wherever, that looks great in the Petri dish, and then we scale it up, and it has just a fraction of the success that was projected or predicted. This happens all the time in privates. It happens all the time in government. So I said, let's use science to think about what are the features of ideas that have a chance to scale, and what are features of ideas that never had a chance, even if you're a great executor, those never had a chance to scale. And that's really what the front half of the book talks about. And I think not only as entrepreneurs, but also as government officials, if we use a little bit of science in what we choose to try to scale and how we scale it, I think we're all going to be much better off, because we have so much in terms of wasted resources. Opportunity cost of time is huge. And I think just generating scientific principles is really a catalyst for economic growth, because when you step back and say, how are regional economies going to grow in the near term and far term? It's going to start with education, it's going to start with innovation, and it's going to start with job creation. So if we can use science in considering which ideas will work and why, I think we're going to be in a lot better place. So thanks for allowing me to do that infomercial.
Hey,
God, I appreciate
no problem. My commission will come later.
10%.
Mervin, yeah, how do you expect, I guess let me see. What do you see as the highest risk? What are the highest risks for our local economy? And I think, are there anything, what can we do to avoid that? So.
Yeah, I think, for Northwest Arkansas, I think our biggest risk is obviously their national cycle, and if the economy as a whole, which we're not at this point predicting that we're headed to a recession, growth will slow here, but it doesn't tend to stick for a long time. So I think our biggest issue is that we might choke on our own growth, and the way we do that is by not developing enough housing, which we didn't. And we alluded to this earlier, as we tended to have a lot of smaller developers. They got cleaned out in the last recession, and they were a lot more skittish about building enough homes for all the people that moved here since 2012. Like, the recession in Northwest Arkansas was over, and we were growing 10, 11, 12,000 people each year, just not building enough homes to keep pace. And so today there aren't any unoccupied houses in subdivisions that are newly built. As I mentioned, the vacancy rate at multifamily units is about less than 2%, which is incredible. But it's not surprising, given that there are all these people that moved here, and we see that in home prices. So that's one piece. And when people think about, we show up in these lists that they were ranked 4th in the nation on U.S. News. The biggest component that goes into it is usually job growth. We still have that. The other component that goes into it is cost of living, which is largely driven by housing. And we've beat Austin recently and Denver, and it's largely because they got a lot more expensive than we did. So we don't want to follow that trajectory that they were on, where they were very successful. They still are very successful, but very expensive to be in. And then with that, growth comes traffic and things like that, and how we deal with all of that is where I think we should concentrate our efforts.
Great. Thank you. So there are several questions around climate change, clean water, air, and soil, and sort of economic development and forecasting. And I guess it's a worldwide issue. So Julie, I'd ask you what are your thoughts around, climate change, maybe ESG here and Europe, places that are kind of embracing that, and then developing economies that maybe don't have the ability and resources there. So give us some insight.
That's a wide-ranging question. I would say, in terms of thinking from a macroeconomist standpoint, there's the energy transition, and then there's the reality of living with a changing climate, which implies costs and migration and retrofitting the economy we have to deal with the reality of climate change. So the energy transition, you mentioned ESG investing. I think we've learned some of the complexities of the energy transition because of the war in Ukraine, right? It seemed easy to say ban nuclear power in Germany, or the ESG investing that was starving capital to the domestic energy industry here. Well, then you end up more beholden to an unfriendly country like Russia, and so we need to rethink that, right? We need to think more expansively about how do we make this energy transition, starting from a point where we're still dependent on fossil fuels. How do we do it in a way that protects the stability of our economies, of our Western market-oriented economies? And so there's a lot of efforts that are going into that now, actually, to protect the domestic energy industry and rethink the energy sources for the European demand. So I think the war in Ukraine's really stimulated a lot of thinking that needed to happen. And then in terms of the realities of climate change, it's already causing changes to agriculture. It's already changing real estate, the cost of insurance. It's manifesting itself in so many ways. Of course, the most vulnerable countries are the least able to absorb these costs. Migration is going to be a growing issue. And again, that requires some global thought leadership and coordination to manage that. You can't just, throw up your hands or pretend that you can turn inward. This is a global issue. It's going to spill over across all of us, and we need global institutions to do some coordinating and some management of what's going to be, a real migration issue.
I can also comment. And this is just thinking aloud about my own experiences in the area of climate. So it was about 20 years ago today. I traveled with a 42-person delegation to Delhi to talk about the Kyoto Protocol. I was working in the Bush White House. I was an advisor on environmental and resource issues, on trade issues to the president. And I was the economist who traveled with our delegation. And as I sat there, just about exactly 20 years ago in Delhi at COP8, Conference of the Parties number 8, I was talking to a lot of developing countries. And I looked around outside and I saw the local economic, air and water pollution problems in Delhi. And I think I would give them the same advice today as what I gave them 20 years ago. You need to take care of your local air and water quality pollution problems and become wealthier, and then help us take care of the problems that we've given the rest of the world. We need the developing countries alongside, of course, but we also have to recognize that we have created this issue for them, and now we need them as partners. And I'm talking about tech transfer. I'm talking about real resource partnerships that can get developing countries on board. Now, as I work a little bit on climate change research myself. A ton of the problem, as we know, is at the household level. And the household level includes consumption in the home and also consumption outside of the home. And there are ways, whether they're prices or nudges, that can help. And that helps a little bit. Now, the bigger solution, I think, will come with partnerships between government and firms. And here I'm talking about setting up the correct incentives in the system. And I'm talking about firms understanding, as they are more and more today, is that there are win-wins out there. In economics, it's called the Porter hypothesis, where there are opportunities to get cleaner and get better with better innovation, but also be more profitable. And I think those are the types of win-wins that, together with some government and some individual behaviors, we can really solve this problem as a community. And I think it really all starts with economic incentives. And I think that right now, with the tech that we have, it's possible and it's available. But back 20 years ago, I can still remember the fight was, is it man-made or is it human-caused? That was a debate we had in the White House. And at the end, I worked there for a few years. The president said, we can now say that it's human-made. So I felt that was at least some progress, but we still have a lot of work to do in this area.
That's great. Thank you very much. Mervin, it's a two-part question. All right, and then we'll close out with your comments. So one is, what do you expect age-related demographic changes to impact the economy? This says in near term, but near, medium, long. And then the second question was, how's the wine in your decanter behind your desk? I don't know who said that, but is it decent wine or is it just there for show?
You keep the decanters oxidized a lot more than the bottles. You got to keep the cheap stuff in there, or else you're going to waste the good stuff.
Got it. I'll remember that when I go to your office.
I think we got like a variation of this question. Like the demographic challenge for all of us, including the state of Arkansas, is that our population is getting older. We have fewer and fewer younger people in the state. Obviously, Northwest Arkansas is a lot younger than the rest of the state because of in-migration more than anything else. But I think the longer-term challenge in Northwest Arkansas and the state as a whole is that we're just not making more younger people. And if we're not importing them from somewhere else, we got to make our own. And I think last year, you asked me when we would get to 1 million people. I said 2045. You all said we'd get there sooner. I said, well, there's one way to fix it. I checked the birth rate earlier. It hasn't been fixed yet. So, this Valentine's Day is around, just 2 weeks away. we could have some November babies if we do this.
Great. Thank you very much. And thank you all for your questions and for your attention. I'll turn it back over to Dean Waller.
Wow, that was terrific. Thank you all. That was awesome. On behalf of the University of Arkansas, I want to thank our panelists and Todd for participating in this business forecast luncheon. Todd, Julia, and John, as a token of our appreciation, $500 scholarships will be presented to Walton College students in your name to attend the National Association for Business Economics Conference. So thank you so much. Of course, we also owe Mervin Jebaraj thanks. He's done a terrific job with this. Thanks to all the faculty and staff who have put in lots of hours on this. Recognition goes to the staff of the Center for Business and Economic Research, particularly Mary Davenport, Kashfia Kamal, and Jeff Cooperstein, and the Office of External Relations and other staff in the Walton College. Please remember to fill out the evaluations in your packets, as well as the forecast entry form. I would like feedback on the event. I'd also like to know how well you could hear and see from where you were sitting. Thank you so much for coming. We thank you for your support these 29 years, and we look forward to seeing you at the 30th next year. Thank you.